Hello everybody and welcome back to the Sanctuary. I'm your host, Professor C, and we're going to do some more A&P today. Specifically, we're going to look at the actions of muscles. So let's jump into it. Let's start off this talk about muscle actions with a little flying sidekick. And what specifically this talk will go over is how you describe body parts when they move away from anatomical position. So for instance, just by looking at this one shot of this man doing a flying sidekick, I see extend leg. I see perhaps bring out to the side would be an abduct thigh. See another abduction over here of a thigh, perhaps even a lateral rotation. I see flex leg right there. I see flex forearm. I see extend arm. I see extend forearm and flex arm. So I see a lot of different motions here just in this one image. If you want to say that his head is doing a rotation, you could throw that in as well. So this is the purpose of this talk, is to describe these movements to you and give you examples of each one real briefly. Flexors and extensors. I've used this term quite a bit in other talks, but now we see them being used in an official lecture. Flexion, which is done by a flexor, is to reduce the angle between two bones. So in this case, if we do flex leg, we're taking these bones and we can't kick them forward because there's a knee joint that prevents us from extending hyperextension of the knee. So we have a flexion, would be kind of kick yourself in the butt, right? Flex leg. Now you could flex arm, right? Here's the arm right here, remember? This is the forearm down there. So when you flex arm, we get it to move forward. Now, there should be an opposite action to this, right? If there is some sort of prime motion, there is some sort of antagonist that will oppose the motion. So an extensor will oppose the flexor. So if I pull the arm back like this is an arm extension, and if I bring the leg back to its original standing position, that's also an extension. Again, you can't kick the knee forward like this because there's a knee situation there, and it prevents you from a hyperextension. Other examples of this would include, say, flex thigh. And if she were to bring her thigh back down to its original anatomical position, that would be an extend thigh. You could do flex wrist and say stop traffic if you're a traffic police officer. And if you did this, if you pulled your hand down and exposed the back of your hand, that would be extend wrist. And here's a classic flex forearm, right? Not because we're making the muscles bulge, that's not why we call that a flex, but because we're decreasing the angle here between the arm and the forearm by doing that. If I were to do the opposite motion, move the curl bar down that way, for instance, that would be extend forearm. All right, dorsiflexion and plantar flexion have to do with the feet, and the muscles involved are called dorsal flexors and plantar flexors. So this one's pretty simple to explain. If you curl your toes upward toward the sky, that's called a dorsiflexion. If you plant them into the ground, like do a tippy toe kind of action, because you can't really curl your toes underneath while you're in anatomical position. If you're in anatomical position and you try to plantar flex, you'll push onto the earth and the body will move up as kind of a tippy toe idea. To curl the toes up is dorsiflexion, and to plant them into the ground or curl them under the foot is a plantar flexion. Here are a couple doing some jumping jacks, at least that's what we called them when I was in school, where you move your arms up simultaneously and your legs out simultaneously from anatomical position, and you jump up in the air. So very briefly, once they do that, then they're going to bring their arms back toward the body, right? And they'll bring the legs back toward the body, and they'll land standing in anatomical position. The guy's doing the same thing over here, but the words that describe these motions are abduction, and you've probably heard this term before, like a child has been abducted. That means they've been taken away. So these words do sound similar, abduct and adduct. Sometimes you hear professors call this abduction, and they spell out the AB so you hear it differently than adduction. So abduction is to move a body part away from the midline, and to add it back, right? It's just like the word sounds like in mathematics, to add it back, to pull it back to the midline, is an adduction done by adductors. All right, a lot of good examples here in this image of levators. Levators, as it sounds. If you get on an elevator, you're brought up into the sky. If you do some kind of levitation, you raise up into the air, right? And a depressor, we know depression is about pushing down on something. So I see some good examples here of, say right there, elevate scapula, to say I don't know. It's a classic human response to I don't know, is to elevate your scapula. She's also got really nice elevation of eyebrows and elevation of eyelids, right? So we see three good examples of this. Maybe someone tells her the answer and she's not so surprised anymore, and she will depress the scapula and depress the eyelid and the eyebrow and let it fall back to anatomical position. Supinators versus pronators, and this has everything to do with the position of the hands when they're kind of stuck out in front of the body. So if you're begging for soup, right, that's how I used to remember that. If you're begging for soup or you're praying to the heavens, right, and you've got your hands outstretched with your palms open like that, ready to get some food or some money or something, if you're begging for your soup, this is called a supination. If you flip your hands over where you expose the back of your hand, like this guy over here getting ready to be wrapped with a ruler because apparently he didn't know the answer to a question in class or something, that's a pronation, where you're exposing the back of the hand or you're putting the palm down. So supination is palms up, pronation is palms down. Inverters and evertors have everything to do with the feet. Now it's kind of hard to see where the midline is, but it would be, say, right here, and the other foot would be over here on this side. So an inversion would be where you roll the foot, as this is clearly showing, inwardly or toward the midline. And an eversion of the foot would be you roll the sole of the foot away from the midline. And in a normal societies like we have today, you don't have to rely on foot inversion or eversion so much, because a lot of the surfaces we walk on, whether it's a floor of a house or a street outside, they're relatively flat. But if you get where you climb hills or mountain climbing or tree climbing, right, which is why this has evolved, you need to have your foot to be able to rotate a little bit, or specifically to invert and evert, so you can get a better grip on the branches. Circumduction is as it sounds. We're going to make circles with something. So here, for instance, this person that is using the arm hula hoops, she's spinning these, hopefully, on her forearm by circumducting her arm. And this fella over here is doing the classic rally symbol in military. He's doing circumduction of his wrist, which his finger will be circumducting with it. Technically different is a rotation, although they are confused a lot. So a medial and lateral rotation, a good example is shown right here on this picture of the guy with the purple tie. Say you want to cross your legs, right, as a male. What you do is you pick one up like this, you rotate it outward, that's a lateral rotation, and then you take this leg and you flex it, decrease the angles between those, and then put it on top of that one, right? So you do a lateral rotation and a flexion of the leg at the same time. You could, however, if you wanted to do something like this, and you wanted to kick your foot out laterally, you could do a medial rotation of the thigh. Now you can also do this, say, with the head. If you shake your head, no, 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 you'd be doing a series of medial and lateral rotations of the head. The trick is when you move it away from the midline, that's called a lateral rotation. And when you pull it back toward the midline in anatomical position, that would be the medial rotation. All right, that's all that one. A very quick one on body actions, muscle actions. Thanks for watching it. Check out some more videos. As the next one, I believe we're actually going to start naming the muscles in groups. So I'll see you for that one. Bye-bye.